Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Hoyt and thanks for joining me for Fotog Friday. Today is a Q&A session. I took some questions to see what kinds of things you are interested in learning about, and I'm going to answer as many of those as I can in today's video. The first question comes from Tessa, and she asks, do you shoot automatic or manual? I'm assuming, Tessa, that you mean in terms of my camera mode versus focusing, which we'll get into later. But I always shoot manually. The best advice I can offer to anyone that's starting in photography is to shoot manually. And the reason for this is it forces you to learn all of your camera settings, your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter speed. And that way, when you're making decisions as you're taking pictures, you can have the best possible solution knowing that you're making all of the decisions rather than having the camera do some of the thinking for you. It was the best decision I made, and it really forced me to kind of jump in the deep end of the pool to shoot manually, but ever since I've never ever looked back. I love having complete control, and I love knowing what my settings are rather than having my camera do it for me, and so that's why I shoot manually. This next question comes from Heather, and she asks, what is your favorite time of day to shoot? This is an easy one for me. As someone who specializes in weddings and portraits, I always schedule my shoots in the evenings, specifically when the sun is setting. Around this time of year, we're in late May. The sun sets somewhere between 7:30 and 8 o'clock, so I usually start my shoots 2 hours prior to that. So right now I schedule my engagement shoots to start around 5:30, and that way we have that last 2 hours before the sun sets to have that nice warm light. A lot of people call it the golden hour. And one reason I really love it is that the light is really soft. Because the sun is low, you're not dealing with harsh shadows on people's faces. And also because the sun is low, you're able to use that to your advantage, especially once it sets actually behind the horizon. You have a nice even lighting. It's really soft and has some nice magenta and orange hues to it. But even when the sun is still above that horizon line, if it's not cloudy outside, you have some awesome sunlight that you can play with, you can shoot into, you can backlight your subjects. It's really, really beautiful and really flattering as opposed to midday when the sun is right in the middle of the sky and it's shining down and you have harsh shadows. In the event of a wedding where I am shooting midday, I just do the best I can to put people in the shade or to backlight them so that I have nice even lighting on their faces. The next question comes from Sydney, and she asks, do I shoot with autofocus or manual? This is a really easy one. I shoot with autofocus 99% of the time. I did originally learn on film where I was always manually focusing, but since switching to digital, I only shoot with autofocus. The main reason is because for me in particular on a wedding day, things are constantly changing around me, and if I were to manually focus, I would be missing so much. So pinpointing where I want to focus in my camera and allowing my camera to do that work for me allows me to shoot a lot more and quicker. Another reason that I shoot autofocus is because I'm usually shooting at really, really wide apertures, which means I have a really shallow depth of field. If I'm manually focusing and if I'm off even the tiniest bit, my picture is going to come out completely blurred. The only exception is I will sometimes shoot manually when I'm taking shots with my macro lens, say ring shots and detail shots and things like that, just because you're working with such a small area, such a narrow plane of focus that sometimes it is helpful to switch over to manual, but the rest of the time I'm always shooting autofocus. This next question comes from Stephanie, and she asks, what are some key investments that aspiring photographers can make? When I first started, I had a Nikon D90 with a kit lens, and then I also got a zoom lens, a 70-300. As I began to shoot, I was figuring out what I wanted to shoot and figuring out what was going to fit my style and see what my needs were. The best investment that I made was actually the cheapest lens I've ever bought. It was $200, and it was a 35mm crop sensor 1.8 lens. And the reason I loved it is because it was my first prime lens, and basically a prime lens means that it's a fixed focal length, so there's no zooming. I'm only at 35mm. But because of that and the way it's designed, I could drop my aperture down all the way to 1.8. Prior to that, my lens was a 3.5 to 5.6, so that range was the lowest aperture I was ever able to drop down toward. But with this new prime lens, I was able to drop to a 1.8. The reason I recommend this for new photographers, and whether it be a 35 or a 50 or whatever is a good focal length for you, find a good prime lens that has a really wide aperture. One, so that you get experience shooting with a prime, you get experience moving, kind of manually focusing with your body rather than standing in one place and relying on your zoom. So it forces you to learn how to use a prime lens, which is something that I've just grown to absolutely love. But secondly, it teaches you how to shoot at wide open apertures. And for someone like me who does weddings and portrait photography, that's something I utilize all the time. Really understanding how that shallow depth of field works and where you focus to make your images really look great, how you can direct your viewer's eye by using that shallow depth of field is a really powerful tool. I'm still amazed that the lens that I recommend to a lot of new photographers is only $200, but it was the best investment I made, and it really took my photography to the next level. There were a few questions about posing, lighting, and editing that I didn't have a chance to get to today. And the main reason is that I'd love to focus more time on those questions, particularly by introducing a new video blog series and focusing on some of these questions in a full video. There's so much good information I'd love to share about editing and posing and lighting and other things like that, but your questions have given me a lot of really great ideas for things that will be to come for Fotog Friday. So thank you so much for submitting your questions. Please continue to ask questions. I love knowing what you would like to hear, and I'll do my best to answer everything to the best of my ability. So stay tuned. There's a lot more to come from Fotog Friday, but I hope you have a wonderful Friday and a fantastic Memorial weekend.
Don't sweat the technique.